So we shall start with what happened. You see, after the first experience with Bhagwan, I had come to understand that he was the embodiment of that highest experience, and only he could give me that. So I was after him. I was mad. And then every weekend, somehow or the other, every Friday evening, you can see me running with the students because the students would go home for the weekend. And I used to tell them very strictly, very sternly, look, these weekends are meant for your studies. Why would you run like this? It's such madness. Why do you have to go to your parents? You're going to be with them all the time. Now this is a time for studies, please stay put. And then, after I met with Bhagwan, I was the first one to run
to him.
And they were all making fun of me openly. So I would wait for the evening, Friday evening to come, and run and jump into any of the buses that was available at the time that would take me to Tiruvannamalai. So for me, because he treated me very differently, in the sense he would completely ignore me. And if I got to sit there, even for a little while in the corner, I was very, very grateful. I couldn't ask for more. So at that time, but at the same time, there was nobody I knew in Tiruvannamalai. There was nowhere I could go spend the night. So I began to sleep outside the houses. There will be a raised a platform outside the houses there. Though I began to sleep carelessly, little caring what would happen to me. I was still young. And then when he saw what I was doing, abandoning every caution to the wind, and then my only aim was to come to him, see him even at a distance, even if he should chase me out, I was ready for it, but I had to have his darshan. I could not live without it. So one day, all of a sudden, when Dwaraknath Reddy came there, he had settled down in Tiruvannamalai, a very rich man. He was the chairman of Nutrien Chocolates. And he had come to settle down as a Ramana devotee. He and his daughter Sandhya. They had a huge house there, just opposite to Ramanashram. So Bhagwan took me very casually to Dwaraknath Reddy's place and left me there. All of a sudden he started back. So I was there, I didn't know what to do. They were all total strangers. But then Sandhya and Dwaraknath Reddy were very, very hospitable and loving. So I stayed there for 5 years, the next 5 years. So Bhagwan saw to it that
5 years?
5 years. That is whenever I came from the college. I immediately would go to their place and spend the night. So I wasn't going to sleep outside houses exposed to all kinds of negative forces. So the Guru will protect you. And once when I was staying in Sandhya's house, Dwaraknath Reddy's house, whenever Dwaraknath Reddy went to have the darshan of Bhagwan, Bhagwan would pay very special attention to him. He would welcome him, keep him next to himself, and would take his hand in his, and then bless him so much. So paying very special attention. So here I was there, and then some relative of Dwaraknath Reddy, one M.S. Rao, had come. And he wanted to have darshan of Bhagwan. So he told Dwaraknath Reddy, please take me to see Yogi ji. Then Dwaraknath Reddy knew. I used to call him Appa. So Appa knew that it was after my own heart. And he said, he just winked at me and then said, why don't you take him? You'll get a chance to be with Swami. And because he's from this house, Swami would pay special attention, and then you would get the chance to sit there. I thought it was my golden opportunity, a great fortune that has come my way. And I said, yes, I would take him. So Mr. M.S. Rao and myself went in the car, And he parked the car right opposite to Bhagwan's residence. And then he walked in the front and I walked behind him. So he went up to the top step and then there was this grill gate. When Bhagwan saw him, he knew. Without being told, he always knew things. He always knew about people, their background, with what thoughts they had come. He knew everything. So he came immediately, he stood up and came immediately and opened the gate. And this M.S. Rao went inside and then I put my foot on the top. He closed the gate. Can you believe that? I was pretty close behind him. As soon as he took him by hand like this, and then when we saw me stepping on to the first one, he closed it in my face and went inside. You can imagine there were so many people there watching this that he deliberately closed the gate in my face. Here I was thinking I was going to spend an hour inside because he would always take Dwarakanath Reddy inside the house. So I had imagined all kinds of things and I was very ecstatic when I reached there, only to be, you know, how he closed the gate in my face. I thought that the thunder had fallen upon my head. And then I ran down the steps and ran all the way through the street to Arunachaleshwara temple. And then I wanted to cry, you know, it was welling up so much, I had to get some relief. And I ran and I found a corner shrine. It's been in one corner of a shrine where nobody would generally visit. And it was just one room and there was a linga there and there was a double door and some steps. So immediately I climbed up the steps, went inside, and there was some space between the wall and the door, and there were a heap of things there. It was about 6 o'clock, I think, and there was semi-darkness everywhere, and there was a heap of things with dried leaves, and there could have been a snake also under that. I wouldn't know, but I was in no mood to care. I went and sat there, and then I indulged in tears. I started to cry, screaming, Yogi Ramsuratkumar, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? I was crying, crying, crying so much for nearly an hour, I think. By then it was very dark everywhere. And maybe 1 hour, 1.5 hours, I had no idea. I used to wear white saris, and the shawl was given to me by him. But otherwise it was white sari, as you saw today in the picture.
Shawl was given to you by Yogi Ramsuratkumar.
Yes, Yogi Ramsuratkumar. And he said, you must always have a shawl. He also gave me his turban,
Wow.
which was threadbare. He had been using it for several years. So when I opened that, it was coming. Another time, now we'll come back to this. So I went and sat in that corner shrine and was screaming, Yogi Ramsuratkumar, Yogi Ramsuratkumar, Yogi Ramsuratkumar. For nearly, it was a japam of a kind. It was screaming japa. And from the depths of my heart, and I cried, and probably it was nearing 8 o'clock. I had no idea of the passing of time, maybe 1.5 hours or 2 hours. I was still crying. And I used to wear only white sari, and I had put that white sari like this, you know, overhead. I was sitting there in the darkness of the room. There was one small mud lamp throwing some light on the linga. Now, suddenly, I heard footsteps of somebody climbing up the steps of the shrine. And then I was alarmed. Because it was a small room with doors, anybody could come inside and close the door and I would be trapped. And it was a corner shrine. Even if I screamed, there would be nobody to hear it. So I felt the danger of something. And this man, poor man, was coming up step after step. And of course, one can hardly imagine there would be some specimen sitting there like this. So he came inside. He went straight to the linga to worship. Now I was frozen in my seat because this man was standing there. If he spotted me, he would close the door. I would be finished. So I was so scared. I was frozen. And then, you know, because I was crying, my eyes were also shining. They were wet and they were shining in the darkness. That fellow, after worshipping, he just turned like that. And he saw some figure in white sari with eyes, you know, flashing. He screamed. He thought it was a ghost sitting there. He screamed and screamed and started to run. And then I heard him rolling down the steps. I was crying until then, until I heard the steps. And then the tears stopped suddenly and I was frozen. And then I was so scared of him and he was so scared of me. And it is he who screamed, and because I became silent. And I'm sure that night he had fever. So he rolled down and then somehow he ran away from the place. Now, looking at the funny side of it, I started to laugh. The laughter broke out, actually. And I was laughing helplessly. I went into peals of laughter for quite some time. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a mosquito came. Until then, there was no trouble. You see, I was sitting on a heap of something. There could have been a snake underneath. There could have been many bees. Those, you know, we have a creepy crawly, which is poisonous also there. And could have been anything. But I was in no mind to mind it. And here I was sitting there and suddenly I was laughing so much. And that is when this mosquito appeared from nowhere and started to bite me. It would not allow me to sit there. So I had to get up and come out. So slowly, I tried to move it away, but then it just wouldn't go. And I got up. I thought it was enough. And suddenly I realized it must be 8 o'clock or something. And I had to go home because those people, Dwaraknath Reddy, his daughter, they would all be waiting. So I came out, and then I just came out of the temple, out the steps, and then looked up. Yogi Ramsuratkumar was standing there at a distance. He was standing there and there was a crowd around him. And it was a little strange because the crowd, you know, there were people of 5.5 feet and so many of them. But above their heads, I could see his neck and the face. He was only 5'2", 5 feet 2 inches. But his neck could not be seen above that, but that was, I was in no mood to think of all that. But I saw very clearly his face and the neck above the crowd. I was so happy that I started, you know, voluntarily, I started to move towards him 1 step, 2 steps, and suddenly the thought came to me, I have had enough for the day, I would not risk anymore. So I slowly turned my direction and then I walked up to the elephant. It was the elephant mandap, right. And that Mahout was there with his stick.
In the temple.
In the temple.
Wow.
It was all this in the temple only.
Wow.
So I started to walk towards the elephant, and then there was a crowd again around the elephant, and we used to give bananas and even those coconuts. You know, it would eat up the whole thing, put the whole coconut into its tummy, and so people were offering the coconut and all that. I went and joined, but my head was always like this, looking at him, and I was standing there. I was afraid to go too close, and I was looking, and suddenly the man next to me had given a coconut. The elephant accepted it, ate it up. And then, instead of blessing him, the elephant's trunk was on my head. And that fellow was screaming, I gave the coconut. How can your elephant touch her? And he was screaming. Here I was so scared because the elephant trunk was right on my head and it kind of slid down like this. And then I felt it was not the touch of the elephant, it was the touch of Swami. That he was kind of making up for what he did to me, because he knew how so then I turned that side. What is it? This feels like Swami's touch. This is not the elephant. And as soon as it came down, the elephant left. And he started with the next man. But here I was thinking, my God, what is, so many strange things are happening to me. And I turned. And there, Swami looked straight into my eye from there. And he raised his hand and blessed from there. To show that it was he who was trying to pacify me for what he did to me. And then I thought, okay, I've had enough and more. I wasn't going to stay there even for a minute. I started to run. And then I ran all my way to, the house of Dwarakanath Reddy is just opposite to Ramana Ashram. Here this was happening in Arunachala Mandir. So I walked, I almost ran all the way to Dwarakanath Reddy's place, and still something was bugging me that Bhagwan would have spent 1 hour with that M.S. Rao. I didn't get even 1 second with him. So this was a great sorrow in me. And then when I reached Dwarakanath Reddy's place, I asked M.S. Rao, you spent 1 hour with him? He said, Amma, what are you asking? The minute he closed the door on your face, hardly 5 seconds, and then he said, all of you get out. And then we all got out. He locked the door and he came straight to Arunachaleshwara temple. So he was right behind me, and I had no idea. I thought he was still there in the house, and I was rejected by him. And he closed the door in my face in front of all the people. So all put together, I was under the impression that I was far removed from him. So this feeling of separation was killing me, that his rejection. And now when I heard that immediately after he rushed to the temple and he was there in Arunachaleshwara Mandir, right behind me in that mandap. So then I understood, when God is very, very close to us, we imagine that he is far away from us. And then we cry and feel helpless, hopeless. But he was there all the time blessing me from the mandap, and I had no idea he was doing that. So this was very funny, at the same time a very profound in its own way, because it taught me a lesson that he was just behind me and I didn't know it, and I was crying for him. And then later I understood he was not only behind me, he's right inside me. All that I have to do, turn this side and start talking to him, and he answers. He's here right inside. He's closer to me than my breath. This is what I understood later.